to have their space a particular way. Maybe it was a grandmother who always had to have the manger in the perfect spot. And if you moved it just an inch, she would notice it and she would tell you about it. Or maybe it was a father who always had his tools in their specific place. And he wasn't mean about it, but whenever you took one or moved one, he also would let you know about it. Well, that was kind of me as a kid. I had my stereo situated on my shelf, perfectly centered. I knew exactly where my CDs were in their box. I had all of my comic books labeled and in their protective box too. Everything had its place. Now, looking back in hindsight on all of it, I was probably a little bit obsessive. My cousins came into the room one time and I let them know how I felt about it in a not too nice way. But that kid, decades ago, he was going through some hard things. His parents had separated. At that time in his life, he didn't have too many friends at school. So in a way, life felt unsteady for him, and I see him differently now. Not just as being particular, but as a kid who was trying to build something that was protective in his life. A small castle, a little space where he got to have a say. Well, we grow up. We don't stop protecting things, but it takes a different kind of shape. We start building things. Not rooms, but schedules. Finances, kids, routines, plans, reputations. Maybe for you it's a calendar, because if that slips, everything else feels like it slips too. Or maybe for you it's your finances, because stability took a long time to build. Maybe it's your kids, their safety, their future. Over time, that protecting starts to look a lot like building. We build to keep things steady, to make life manageable. And none of that is dysfunction. It's maturity. It's care. It's responsibility. Those are good things. And most often, the reasons behind those things are good too. But here's the thing. Good things can crowd a life. They can crowd a vision. And anyone who is nearly drowned can attest what is necessary for life can even suffocate. But what if we didn't have to be held back by what was in front of us only? Over the past few weeks, we have been talking about hope during this Advent season, and that makes sense. Well, last week we dug into hope. We kind of had a conversation about hope in a little bit of a different way. We're used to talking about expectations, and we're used to talking about calibrating our expectations, but sometimes we calibrate our expectations in smaller ways that diminish our hope. It turns out that when we give our expectations and our desires to God, He can do an even better thing by giving us a better hope. That sounds great, doesn't it? Whether you're walking with God, whether you've been walking with God for a long time, whether you're hesitant, whether you're exploring, whether you're just curious about God, who doesn't want to live with a better, bigger hope? Hope that vitalizes us and gets us out of bed, that helps us to press through the mess. Hope. At the same time, this leaves us all with a little bit of a dilemma. Giving our expectations and our desires to God to shape, well, that seems like the best idea, but it doesn't always feel like the best idea. And this is what's at stake. Somewhere the very things that we protect for good reasons, they can quietly shape what we're able to hope for. And not that they're wrong, but they carry weight. They influence what's possible. they train us in what feels risky. And if we're not careful, they don't just steady our lives, they begin to limit our future and define us in ways that we were never meant to be defined. But friends, what if we could feel lighter again? What if we could stretch our imaginations beyond what we feel responsible for keeping intact? What if hope could become something that we actually enjoy instead of something that we have to guard? And what if we didn't have to fear giving God our expectations because we didn't just know, but we felt that whatever the outcome, it would genuinely be for the better? And that brings us to the tension that we live with. Because wanting that kind of hope is one thing, but letting go to receive that kind of hope, that's an entirely different thing. So here's the question that I want us to sit with today. How do we give God our desires and expectations to shape when those desires and expectations come from reasonable, even good intentions? Luke doesn't answer that question with a concept. Luke, the writer of one of the Gospels, he answers it with people, ordinary people, doing their jobs, managing what was entrusted to them. And when hope arrives, it comes as a surprise to these people, but it also comes looking for a kind of person. So let's step into Luke chapter 2 together. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them. And they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." And suddenly a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth, peace to those on whom his favor rests." I wonder, at the time that the angel said to the shepherds, to those on whom his favor rests, did the shepherds know that the angel was speaking to them? Our scene opens in wide open spaces with a bunch of blue-collar workers pressing through the night shift. Shepherding, it wasn't easy back in the day. Moving herds of sheep, keeping them all together, keeping them fed, protecting them. Carpentry would have been a lot closer to home. Working in the vineyard would allow them to go to their own beds at night. But there is a little bit of a misconception around the world of shepherding that many have back in the day. It wasn't a shameful practice. The Lord is my shepherd. Comes from one of the most famous Psalms, showing that being a shepherd wasn't a diss, it wasn't marginalization, it was elevation. It was like the farmer or the rancher of our day. It was hard, gritty, blue-collar work at the same time. It's the kind of work that made the world go around in that time and in that day. It's one of those professions that the ancients would have had respect for, and we see that in the Hebrew Bible. At the same time, we might not expect the angels to make an announcement to a group of people that were so common. They weren't scribes, they weren't priests. If they had any heritage, well, we aren't told about it, and we don't even know their names. Those on whom his favor rests? What for? Was it because they were unseen? Because they were simple? because they weren't at the religious center of everything? When I read the Gospel of Luke, and not everybody leans so hard as I do on this, but I tend to read it, I try to read it like I'm hearing it for the first time, or reading it for the first time through Theophilus's eyes. Theopha who? Well, Theophilus is on page 1 of the Gospel of Luke. He's the one that he addresses this entire gospel to. Now, maybe Luke had a bigger audience in mind, and many people think that Theophilus was the person who financed this gospel, and that's probably true. Maybe also Theophilus, which literally means friend of God, was just a code name for someone else, or possibly even a group of people. We don't know. Even still, I think Luke thought that this man could benefit from the story of Jesus that he was about to tell. And one of the ways was through a closer look at the people who tended to be closest to Jesus throughout the story. Throughout the book, shepherds, a wily prophet, tax collectors, a woman caught in shame, a commander of a Roman guard share something in common. Now, all of these groups of people are an unlikely common. It's kind of like hearing one of those a priest, a pastor, and a rabbi jokes where you know it's a setup. But Luke is making a point. In spite of the dramatic differences of all of these people, they encounter Jesus positively because they share something in common, a trait that shows up in their words and also shows up in the things that they do. And it's the same. John the Baptist said this, I am not worthy to untie the strap of his sandals, when referring to Jesus. The centurion said this, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. A sinful woman bows down and with her tears and with her hair, she cleans and washes the feet of Jesus. The vertically challenged tax collector shuns pride and climbs up a tree, the tax collector by the name of Zacchaeus, to get a peek at Jesus. Now, maybe it's subtle, but I think that the shepherds are in this same category of people, and their actions tell the story. Let's follow along with Luke again. When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about. So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said. Now, we don't know much about this Theophilus character. He was probably a wealthy person. He was probably a person of high reputation. He maybe even had an official title or a place of authority. In the book of Acts, he calls him most excellent, a form of address for somebody who was possibly in power or somebody who had some kind of esteem associated with him. But perhaps, I'm assuming that it wasn't his first encounter with Jesus, but perhaps he was still hesitant. Maybe he had a reputation to protect, a legacy to build. And although he was considered God-friendly, he probably knew that there was a cost to following Jesus. What do these shepherds do when they first get the good news? They don't argue. They don't qualify themselves. They don't ask for credentials. They don't delay until the daylight. They just go. And that word hurried that Luke uses is no accident. There is urgency to their obedience. And when they find the sign after scouring the town, notice they had to find the sign. They had to go all over. It wasn't like playing a game of geo-tracker on their smartphones. They had to work to find Jesus. They don't hesitate to spread the good news. They aren't too big for it. They aren't ashamed of it. Schedules aren't too packed for it. They became the first people to share the message of Jesus. Hope didn't come to people with the worst resumes or the best resumes. Hope came to a group of people whose resumes weren't too important to receive it and to see its worth. There's a word for that, and we've been kind of grasping around it, and that word is humility. Humility. These are those upon whom God's favor rests, and the first to receive God's message. But there's a lot of different definitions of humility floating around, so let's ground ourselves in one that the Apostle Paul gives later in his letter to the Philippians. He says this about humility: it's valuing others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. And I like to look at it as a kind of seeing. A kind of seeing. It sees the interests of others as very big things. I had a brief conversation with somebody about humility yesterday. It came up that I was praying for it, and I said that I admitted that it's something that I'm also a little scared of when I pray for it too. He wisely interjected, humility is not humiliation. And I paused for a minute because just a couple months earlier, as I was praying for it, that's the word I wrote down in my journal, humiliation, because that was what I was afraid of. But because I can't resist a good conversation, I sat for a minute, and then I decided to push back a little bit. And I said, well, certainly God could use humiliation, right? And, well, my friend agreed. He could use humiliation. And then we both paused for a little bit of a minute, and almost at the same time, we kind of came to this conclusion or this moment of clarification around the conversation. And we both said in a way, well, but that's not his intent. What's different is his intent. Sure, we can look like fools when we make a mistake at work that costs the company a good deal of money. We can look really bad at school when we confidently yell out the right answer, what we think is the right answer, and it ends up being the wrong answer. We can also look like fools when we drop an untimely joke at a Christmas party and no one laughs. And God can use that. But here's the difference. His intent is not to make us fools or to destroy our reputations. It's to ground us. It's to make us deeper. It's to prepare our hearts for a better hope. And that's why sometimes what we protect, our reputation, our interests, our futures, while those are all good things, our protection of them can get in the way of the deepest things, the transformation that leads to life, the change that drops burdens and carries hope with joy, laughter, and strength. We just have to see it differently. We don't have to drop our concerns. We just have to weigh them against what brings greater light. Humility makes our hope shapeable because it helps us see beyond what we're protecting. If that's true, if humility actually helps us see beyond what we're protecting, then the question becomes a very, very practical one. What actually shifts when humility is at work, and what loosens in us? What inside of us quiets down. And how does that change the way that we hope for things every day? 3 things. First, humility loosens our grip on control. Most don't cling to control because we're arrogant. We cling because we're responsible. We're managing risk. We're just trying to keep things running. And when that's true, control feels like a safety, and letting go can feel like it's something that's reckless, that's irresponsible. But humility creates a pause in that instinct. It's not a collapse of responsibility. It's just a moment where control isn't the loudest voice in the room, a moment where we don't protect first and listen second. That's where hope finds space to be shaped. Not when everything is settled, but when control stops being the only thing that we trust. Second, humility helps us to be content when enough is enough. This is a picture from a year ago. As you walked into the church today, you saw maybe a big tree, Christmas light tree that's up. Well, 2 days before our light show, our opportunity to serve the community was about to finish. Last year, a wind came and made a statement at Christ Church. Now, fortunately, it was well beyond the weekends where we bring people in and we serve them in masses. There was only 2 days left for the show, and I figured, well, it is what it is, and we have 10 minutes to fix this thing and get it back up into shape. When I was driving into the parking lot yesterday, that tree looked worse than that from the winds on Friday night. And here's the thing, the flagpole that holds it up, there's a 2-week delay to get a new one, and we're right in the middle of serving all of the folks that are going to be coming here. So on a whim, I reached out to Kenny, who's one of the team members who helps put that thing up and put that thing together and maintain it, and he came over and we assessed the situation, and we're like, all right, what can we do? What can be done? Can anything be done? We just took a look at it and we realized that we still had the broken one from last year. Well, like that's going to help. But it turns out that the piece that broke on it last year was different than the piece that broke on it this year. We were able to cobble this thing together with some additional help in just a couple of hours. And my friends, it was amazing. It was just what we needed. Not more than what we needed. It was just what we needed. Somebody asked me afterwards, you must have been so relieved. And I wasn't relieved because I was settled. I figured there's no way that this is going to change. It's just going to be what it's just going to be. But in a surprise moment, I had a different emotion entirely. I was grateful that God showed up and gave us just what we needed at the last moment. We didn't have a backup, but it turns out that something broken that would work showed up. Exactly what we needed. And it's not wrong to have backups in life, but there is better hope than a backup. When God meets us on the edge, we don't need more to feel secure. We just need Him. And that enables us to say, whatever we have in this moment, small or great, it's enough. And that frees us from chasing security, from even letting comparison creep in and constantly remind us that there's more security to be had here and there and everywhere. Humility, it helps us rest in the truth that God can meet us without the security of excess and still exceed our expectations. Third, humility widens our vision beyond ourselves. When hope really takes root, it doesn't stay private. It doesn't get hoarded or guarded. It moves, it spills. It starts to matter to people beyond us. And that's what happened with the shepherd. But more importantly, that's what can happen with us too. Humility loosens our instinct to ask, how does this affect me? And instead it replaces it with a better question, what might God be doing here? Notice the shepherds, they don't leave their lives behind. They return to the same work, the same responsibilities, but they return different. They return lighter. They return more awake. Their lives are no longer centered on what they're managing, but on what they've witnessed. That's the shift that humility makes. Friends, it doesn't reduce responsibility, it reframes responsibility. It helps us to see that our lives are part of something larger than what we are protecting. And when that happens, hope stops feeling fragile. It becomes something that we carry, and it becomes something that is worth sharing. So imagine what might change in your lives if humility began to take shape of your hope this week. Not so much to make you care less, but by freeing you from carrying everything alone in your life. What if enough really could be enough and you could trust God to meet you in those spaces? Imagine what it could do among us too. A community less driven by comparison, less guarded perhaps, quicker to rejoice when good news shows up. A people who still worked hard, still carried responsibilities, but do so with lighter hearts and a wider vision. Because humility doesn't make hope smaller, it makes hope shareable. It makes hope livable. And it lets us discover again that God's provision, it's so much better than what we're protecting. Let's pray.